Hello and welcome to the Media Club. I'm your host, Matt Deegan. In the club today, Charlotte Moore resigns from the BBC, kickstarting a flurry of changes at some big indies. Chris Curtis, editor of Broadcast Magazine, takes us through what it all means and who's in the running for the BBC's top creative job. Also on the programme, how is 5 News bucking the trend and growing its audience? Reporter Warren Nettleford tells us more. And why do audio paywalls work in Europe, but less so in the UK? We find out from Podimo's Jake Chudnow. That's all happening in this edition of the Media Club. Come on in. So welcome guys to the Media Club. Nice to see you both again. Warren, reporter, entrepreneur, media hyphenate.
I'll take that, why not?
Who's on your list this week to join the Media Club?
I'd say Oliver Darcy. He is the CNN reporter who went away, left CNN in the last, I think, 3 or 4 months, and has started his own newsletter. I think you know about this newsletter, right? And since then, it seems he's turning over revenues approaching $1 million. And it just goes to show the power of building a personal brand and utilising that to create your own, content platform. Yeah,
so he sort of wrote CNN's media newsletter. He originally took over from Brian Stelter, I think, sort of set up status. Big write-up in the Wall Street Journal this week about it. I mean, an amazing success to get to, $1 million bucks after not a huge amount of time.
Yeah, and as I understand, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong here, I think it's like $20 a month, which is quite a lot of money, I think, for us in the UK, but maybe in the US where wages are high, it's not that much. So getting to $1 million is a lot easier than when you charge in the UK. But I think it goes to show just how there's a real craving for this kind of information. And because he's a trusted journalist and has built up that profile and reputation at CNN, people are willing to pay the money.
Yeah, and he delivers scoops.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the main thing. It's not like a Tesco newsletter, right? It's like he knows all the key people. He's got the stories. He's got the scoops. So you want to be subscribed to that newsletter.
Well, he can definitely join the club and tell us all the secrets. Editor of Broadcast, Chris Curtis. Who have you got joining the club this week?
I'll tell you who's had a good week this week. It's Wayne Garvey at Sony. So Wayne Garvey runs international production for Sony, so all TV production pretty much outside of the US. And he has managed to solve his own succession quandary. So Andy Harris was the sort of supremo at left bank, one of the absolute Premier League drama producers of his generation, any generation really. And Andy will forgive me, I hope in saying, advancing years. And there's been a question for a little period of time now about what does left bank pictures look like post Andy Harris? And the answer to that question, as revealed on the morning of this podcast record, is that Charlotte Moore, who's in charge of all content outside of news and online at the BBC, is swooping in to run left bank, and Andy will take on a sort of a chairman role there. And Wayne Garvey has orchestrated that and managed to pull it off. So he's got a brilliant succession plan, and he's managed to do it without that story leaking, which is both massively impressive and hugely annoying. This is probably why no one's paying me £1 million for my newsletter yet.
Come on.
Yet.
Well, let's get into that as the first story this week. As Chris said, breaking news that Charlotte Moore, the Chief Content Officer at the BBC, has resigned to join Left Bank Pictures. She's going to become the CEO and EVP and Creative Director of the parent company, Sony Pictures. As you said there, Chris, big surprise. No one saw this coming. Loads of people are texting me going, this is proper new news.
Wowzers was the word that kept popping up on my phone, which tells you how slightly uncool my contacts are. Look, it was a shock. I think it's really interesting. It speaks to a lot of things. I mean, there is context, personal context to all of this. Charlotte's worked at the BBC for an awful long time. She joined in 2009 commissioning documentaries, right? And we're now 2025. Her roles got steadily bigger and bigger over the years. The breadth of her remit is quite gobsmacking, really. Radio Now reports into her. iPlayer, which is the front door of the BBC, falls under her remit. All content across every genre falls under her remit. So doing that job is an immense challenge. She's done it fantastically well. honestly, I think I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of times in 15 years that someone said a bad word to me about Charlotte
seemingly
Moore.
Incredibly well liked.
Very well liked. And she innately, the BBC is in her bones, it's in her DNA. And I would say, arguably, that the structure that they've created there works around Charlotte. And it's grown up. That structure has coalesced, is that the right word? Around Charlotte. They now have the tricky situation of planning their own succession, right, and what that looks like, and that will be a difficult thing to do.
Well, let's talk about that in a sec. I mean, Warren, when you are talent, it's so important to have someone at the top who you trust, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. Just having a real sense of leadership, someone having a real creative vision. And I've never worked with Charlotte, and I've been handling the BBC for a number of years now. But from what I understand, she's someone who's very well respected. And I think the BBC are in a situation now where they're looking at, I think it's 2028 when it comes to the renewal of the Royal Charter, potentially, where they need to be planning as to what they want to be as an organisation following that moment. And because the iPlayer now has done so well, it's been a real turnaround, really, the iPlayer in the past 3 to 5 years. You know, who is the person who has the ability, who has the vision, who can have some new creative ideas to enable the BBC to compete with the streams internationally? The BBC needs someone really with that at that level, I would say, because I think, as someone who hasn't been in the BBC for a long time but passionately believes in what the BBC does, I think it's a real shame that the BBC isn't seen as being at the same level as an Amazon, as a Netflix, or as even HBO in the United States, because the library, the back catalogue is so phenomenal that I think the BBC needs someone who can grasp it and come up with some new ideas to creatively take it forwards. I
mean, tough job, tough person to replace. Who would be on that list?
Well, this is based on having done zero reporting and just my own sort of innate senses of these things. It is harder to find. The BBC in years gone by had channel controllers, and when you were a channel controller, particularly if you're a channel controller at say, I mean, even BBC 4 as was, but certainly 3 and BBC 2. That was a way in which genre specialists got pan-genre experience, right? So you could come up, and if you were a factual person, learn about how to commission and create a comedy strategy. Or if you worked in scripted, what does entertainment look like? There are fewer of those people within the BBC, and there are fewer of,
it's a really flat structure.
It's a very flat structure. It's genre-based. And across the industry, the pool of people that could take on that job is pretty small. Whether they could, the other thing to say about that job is you earn a fraction of what your peers and counterparts. I mean, genuinely, I don't mean half. I mean a fraction of what that. So you've got a job that is intense levels of scrutiny. That hasn't changed over the years.
Front page news
all the time, and a small salary in the grand scheme of like top media jobs. But they will be looking at, a name that springs immediately to mind is someone like Anne Mensah.
Okay.
At Netflix. Yeah. Done an outstanding job at Netflix. Netflix UK has really made its mark in the last 18 months, delivering some of the biggest global shows in the world
Supercell, yeah.
Exactly. All these things that are coming out of the UK. And funnily enough, the breadth of Netflix is very impressive and interesting. The breadth of their programming now is like a mainstream broadcaster. Now, I have no sense of whether that job would be appealing to her, but that's the kind of calibre of talent they would think about. There's Patrick Holland at Banijay, used to run BBC Two, very well regarded. Has left the corporation doing a commercial role. People of that ilk.
What about Jay Hunt at Apple?
So, Jay's creative credentials are second to none. I could potentially see Jay more as a would-be or future DG,
right? Yep.
Rather than necessarily a chief content officer. I mean, she ran BBC One many years ago now. She's at Apple. They're fundamentally different. Apple commissions a very small number of very high-end things each year. I mean, Jay certainly has the skill set to do it, but I wonder whether to lure her back to the corporation, it might need to be the very top job.
It's difficult. And what's going to be on Charlotte's plate at left bank then?
Mainly what will be on her plate is not being on the front page of the Daily Mail or now that The Crown's come to an end as well. I mean, look, all the drama companies at the moment are grappling with the reset in spending. I actually think a lot of those production companies are further along on that challenge than has recently been reported. I feel a bit like some of the coverage around the drama crisis is from the sort of 18 months just gone, and actually an awful lot of really good, compelling, high-quality drama can be made for certainly less than £3 million an hour. And if you look at the things that have worked really well for Netflix recently, Baby Reindeer, Fool Me Once, huge global smashes, they are not full of VFX dragons, right? They come in. And if you look at what's working for the BBC, Ludwig, which has now been sold in 85 territories around the world, £2 million an hour, really resonates with British audiences and is a big global success. Or should be. So I think that finding a new way of delivering outstanding scripted content in a more financially prudent time is the challenge for all major scripted companies.
I would watch Ludwig if it had more dragons, some VFX dragons in it. I think add another layer.
There you are. That's what she'll be working on
to the series. Close to home, the BBC's released its report into the former Radio 1 and 1 Extra presenter DJ Tim Westwood, apologising for how it handled the complaints. Warren, did you see much of this report?
Yeah, I did, and it was quite damning in terms of how many times complaints were made and weren't investigated. And it seems that although I'm not sure what's going on right now with the criminal investigation into Tim Westwood, it seems the BBC did make a series of mistakes. They've admitted they could do better and are trying to put some new processes in place. If people don't know much about this story, I'd recommend they watch on iPlayer, actually, a documentary by Dan Henry, a former BBC reporter, into Tim Westwood, which involved interviewing victims who say they were, affected by him.
I mean, it's a report that's sort of been in the cupboard for quite a long time because of the criminal investigations. I think it's about 140 pages. I read the first 70 yesterday, and it's a fascinating read, and it's not something which you normally would read about. It's really interesting from a talent management perspective. They've got all the emails and conversations between producers and bosses. The person doing the report is a KC. It's an expensive report, cost $3.3 million, which is about a third of the budget of 1 Extra that Tim Westwood was on. But when you dig into the talent management side, it just kind of shows this this difficulty that we come back to all the time about big name talent and how you deal with them. And a lot of the production team and the exec producers were actually pretty good at dealing with their team who had problems with him, and he seemed to be quite a tough person obviously to work with. There's in the report there's 2 elements. There's him as a working relationship and then him with other allegations. But the working report stuff is fascinating. But we always come back to this issue, don't we, of how production works with talent and the talent get away with things.
Yeah, there's a real issue regarding duty of care, always regarding contributors, staff, and then that relationship between talent, editorial, management. Getting that right is something which lots of broadcasters, not just broadcasters, production companies have got wrong in the past 5, 10, 15 years. And I'm sure people in the industry a lot longer than we've been in the industry would say things have been bad for a long period of time. So I think for the BBC, it's good they've done this report. It's bad that they've taken so long to do it. I mean, people forget that. I think Westwood hasn't been on the BBC for more than 10 years now. Yes. So it's a very, very long period of time that it's taken to get this report done. But I'm hoping that this is good news for the people who've been affected by what happened, and the BBC can move forward positively.
I mean, Chris, it's sort of another in a long line of these sorts of problems.
It reflects really badly on the industry, right? These are it was ever thus, right, that talent was put on a pedestal and allowed to behave in a way they shouldn't behave. There are, of course, there's a spectrum in all of this, right? Some of the stuff around Westwood is really sort of, if those allegations are correct, and the criminal prosecution is sort of appalling kind of stuff. And then, on the other hand, you've got talent, shouting at junior members of production staff, right? They're not the same thing. Neither of them is acceptable. I do think that there is a greater consensus now in the industry than ever before about what is and what isn't acceptable. I think people know that. The challenge with all these things is to turn the the good intentions and the edicts from the top of these organisations, and to make that to reality, on the studio floor or on location or whatever it might be, and how this is the challenge facing production companies and broadcasters. How do you genuinely empower people, junior members of staff, to feel like they can come forward and say, this is not right, I don't like this is making me feel uncomfortable.
Creating a culture, isn't it? The right culture.
Precisely that. And has the industry got it right? No. It's miles away still from getting it right.
One of the bits that's quite interesting, they refer to everybody by job titles. You have to sort of remember who was doing what when. But it looked like she had a conversation with Andy Parfitt, who was the controller of Radio 1 and had hired Tim Westwood. And it was important for him that Westwood did one extra. So sort of not forced Westwood to do it, but really pushed him to do it. Therefore, he was sort of, played along a little bit because he made him do this job. Yeah. But also, he's taken to task a little bit by the KC about having a bad culture at Radio 1. And actually, a lot of Andy's sort of sell was that how he transformed the culture at Radio 1 and had a really good culture. If you talk to people there, I think generally that they would agree with that. But then there's these kind of glaring holes, and you can kind of get slightly annoyed at this, but sort of acknowledges that yes, that's what the case was, and it's easy to have blind spots.
I think you've got to bear in mind that Tim Westwood was a very popular DJ and was very well respected in that genre of music. Not just in the UK, but also internationally. Yep. So he was, a real asset to the BBC. So having to balance the fact that he was popular, he was a great asset, he did good programming against these allegations too, which, were improving at the time. It must have been a difficult balancing act.
Yeah. Okay, finally, just before the break, Warren 5 News is having a bit of a resurgence, according to a piece in the Press Gazette this week. That's your old stomping ground. Yeah. A good place to be.
Yeah, Channel 5. Loved working there, presenting and reporting there for a while. And one of the key things that they do so well at 5 is they focus on their audience. And I've been very fortunate that I've worked across the different newsrooms at ITN, at Channel 4, ITV and Channel 5. And the key difference is at Channel 5, the audience is very much skewed towards the north of England. The audience is older. I think in the early 60s on average, the audience is there. And the programme is shorter. It was shorter. It's been extended to an hour now. But what that means is, on average, the length of news reports they do on Channel 5 are only around 2 minutes, or 150 or 2 minutes. If you watch a Channel 4 news piece, it's around 4. And that means you've got to be really creative in the way that you tell stories. You've got to be really tight with your scripting. You've got to be really focused on getting all your case studies into the piece. And what you'll also notice at Channel 5 is they're very keen on getting the case studies higher up in pieces compared to other broadcasters, because they really understand that audiences appreciate that. So I think Debbie has done a great job. I haven't been there for a while now at 5. I did go back to work on the US election in November, which was great. But I think what Debbie's been doing with the team, and Dan, of course, is such a great presenter and someone who is so personable and inserts himself into the story even from the studio.
It's a good hire by Ben.
Yeah, he was a great hire, wasn't he? Because he's got that recognition. People know Dan. He's very familiar. He's an amazing live performer. And so if you put all that together and Debbie's focus on ensuring that case studies are front and centre of all their pieces, I can understand why they've been successful this year.
And Chris, you had a piece in broadcast with Ben Frow.
Yeah, we did a piece with Debbie and with Ben, actually. And I think, relatability is sort of a really important part of what we're talking about. That notion of you're making news for people that might be lighter consumers of news. And certainly, Debbie Ramsey's talked about making news for people that might vote reform or vote for Brexit or whatever, which can feel very distant, I think, to sort of the upper echelons of central London media world. So I think some of the success at 5 News is about that sort of relatability. And that's also true of the wider Channel 5 operation, in terms of if you talk to people about how Ben Frow runs that channel and his really quite tight team of commissioners. It's with relatability to viewers in mind. I
mean, he was at a point where he was going to leave, and then he sort of unresigned, and now obviously he's going into a point where Paramount's going to be acquired.
Yeah, there was some noise, and there were lots of rumours swirling around, sort of late summer, early autumn last year that Ben may call time on things. I don't think the suggestion was that anyone was going to get rid of him. He's been very successful there, but he might call time. He did have a bit of time away from the business. In this interview that he's done with us, he's talking about being refreshed, ready to go under the new ownership. They are, it's very interesting, like all broadcasters, they are navigating. Do you navigate a tightrope? You walk along a tightrope,
you
balance a tightrope. You balance a tightrope between your older viewer who likes linear programming and clever manipulation of the schedule and picking up a percentage point of share here and there, and the inevitable on-demand future. And Ben and Channel 5 have been sort of experts of the former, and now there is a growing acceptance on their part that they also need to navigate that on-demand world a bit more, and that will be a focus in the coming sort of 18 months, 2 years for Channel 5.
Okay, time for a break. Thanks to Chris Curtis. When we return, Jake Chudnow on success in Europe, all after these messages.
Hello Media Club listeners, Patrick here from Podcast Discovery, the podcast marketing company, where this week we've been thinking about the Six Nations. Why? Because England rugby stars Ben Youngs and Dan Cole are spending the tournament in the Podcast Discovery virtual studio, recording their chart-topping show for the love of rugby. Insightful analysis, decades of experience, and they look great. To speak to us about the virtual studio or anything else to do with podcast marketing, head to podcastdiscovery.com. That's podcastdiscovery.com.
Where do you listen to your podcasts? Maybe on the commute, in the car, or you might be watching me on your screen now. Hello. Here's a surprising fact. More people than ever are watching podcasts on YouTube. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast or already have one, adding a video element could open up a whole new audience. That's where Podshop comes in. With expert engineers, a purpose-built recording studio, and top-tier equipment, Podshop makes it easy to create high-quality video content that helps your podcast reach a wider audience. So whether you're new to podcasting or a seasoned pro, Podshop Studios is the perfect setting for your video podcast. And for a limited time, enjoy 25% off your first booking at Podshop Studios with the code Media Club. Don't miss out. Visit podshoponline.co.uk today and take your podcast to the next level. Welcome back. Here's what we've been talking about in the Media Club this week. More headaches for the Washington Post as their opinion editor departs over more interference from owner Jeff Bezos. The Amazon founder has decreed the paper will defend personal liberties and free markets across its op-eds. He said, we'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. VFX giant Technicolor UK has gone into administration, with the majority of its 440 employees being made redundant. The VFX sector has been challenging for many over the past 5 years, COVID and writers' strikes. Insiders believe it might not be the only company to go under this year. And the Observer has confirmed that the new regime will take over from Easter Sunday, passing the editorial baton to Tortoise chief James Harding. It's not all plain sailing, though, with news this week that Carol Cadwallader will not be continuing at the paper. She hasn't exactly endeared herself to the new editor-in-chief, firing a few salvos from her new Substack that she launched in November. Warren Nettleford is still here, and we're joined by Podimo's Global Director of Studios, Jake Chudnow. Hey, Jake.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us on the sofa. Welcome to the club.
Great show. I'm happy to be here.
Good.
Why are you so far away from me?
I was told by the producer to move as far away from you as possible.
It's very important that
I was ready for a hug.
It's very important we keep the guests away from each other in case there's any trouble. That's why.
All right.
Podimo, you've had a great week announcing 1 million paying subscribers.
Yep.
That's quite the milestone.
It is. I've also just celebrated my 5th year at Podimo, and to do that I looked back on some of the first Slack messages I got when we were celebrating milestones at like 9,000 subscribers. Wow. And at that time, I think Luminary had about 250,000 subscribers, which seemed impossible. But yeah, here we are. So
people who don't know, so initially a Nordic company, sort of podcast firm, but with a strong paywall strategy.
Yeah, founded in Denmark 5-6 years ago. Primarily a subscription service to date. featuring about 1,000 exclusive shows that we've made or licensed, as well as a whole lot of audiobooks.
And why are people subscribing to your service versus Apple Podcasts or other places?
Yeah, so well, our service is nice. we put a lot of work into the service itself. So the product, we've introduced a lot of features, especially over the last year, to allow community engagement, connecting listeners to listeners, listeners to creators. And those features have allowed us to do things like launch a show in Norway last month, which got 100,000 engagements, comments, emoji, reactions, 100,000. So that's Norway, a fairly small market, engagements on a single episode, the first episode of the show. We think our product has led to a 45% increase in listening this year compared to last year, to about 20 hours a month, which is about 40 minutes a day. That is longer than I talk to my mother every day. So it's an amount of engagement that we really appreciate from our listeners. We value really highly. So it's a great service, but content is a big differentiator. And content investment comes along with that. And if you're looking at the markets that we're in, some of them are markets that do have a relatively strong ad market, like Germany, but most don't. And Podimo is one of the only companies that's making investment into content creators in those markets. And the ad markets are at a level at the moment where without that investment, there is no creation.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the kind of creator economy on the show and people sort of striking out and doing their own things. Earlier, we were talking about Status and the newsletter and Substack's doing well. I mean, if you are a creator, if you're a podcaster that's been doing pretty well, you've got a large audience, particularly, I guess, in those markets like Denmark or Norway, where there are challenges over ads. That's the decision to make, isn't it? Like, how can my content be funded? What's the best way to achieve that success?
Yeah. So in especially in some of the smaller markets where the ad market is at, for relatively, there's some more maturing to go. Ad revenue alone is not a viable path for a creator to make a living off of their work. So it does take a platform like Podimo to enable creators to make what they make. And by doing so, we've been able to put together a really fantastic family of shows, which is the big differentiator. You can, of course, as an individual creator, create an individual subscription and monetize superfans, and that will work for some creators relatively well. It also means that creator needs to live and breathe what we are living and breathing, which is how do we attract paying subscribers? How do we make sure we're engaging them in a way that they stick around and see value in sticking with us for a while? Churn rates. So by being a part of a subscription service, that service kind of takes that work away from the creator.
Warren.
Is your strategy different depending as to which European market you're in?
Yes. I mean, what's not different is that the strategy is a hyper local one. Okay. So that is the consistent strategy. Of course, that means we are engaging listeners in different ways with different types of content in our markets.
Do you think it could work in the UK in the same way? Because obviously, the model you're using in Europe doesn't really seem to have much traction in the UK in the same way.
Well, it's interesting that you've got you talk about advertising. So UK market's larger. A lot of content creators come into the market, live off ads, but also do touring or do merch or do other things. Do you think there are differences in markets like the US and UK compared to other language markets?
I think that the UK needs a subscription model more than it thinks it does.
Okay.
And the UK is a robust ad market compared to some other European markets, but it's not robust compared to the States, and it's generally not a robust ad market. There's a lot, and there's some players that are making great strides in bringing more robustness to the market, but I think there's a lot of room for growth. I would say the UK looks a bit more like some other European markets than it does the States, especially if you look at the amount of ad money or investment from advertisers per active user, per podcast listener in the markets. the US advertisers are spending a lot more money per active user than they are in the UK. And you couple that with, again, comparing the UK to Europe, the UK charts are a lot harder to break into. The talent cost and the production cost is higher. So that combination makes for a really difficult ad market and a need for subscription.
And does it rely on listeners who are passionate about shows? I mean, they're subscribing to Podimo. It's a kind of once you subscribe, it's all you can eat, so you get all the premium content on there. Are you looking for people in those markets that have really deep connections with audiences?
Yes is the short answer. And I think a lot of our new subscribers typically do come in for a single show, and they'll be the super fans of those shows. What we're seeing as we mature as a service is that the service itself is a bigger and bigger driver of interest in subscribing and proving value of a family of shows. And so whilst a listener may come in for a single show or a super fan of that single show, what they find is they're delighted by lots and lots of other shows that are similar to it.
Which hopefully reduces churn as well, I guess.
Correct.
And Warren, you're entering the audio market as well, own production company, Indio Media.
Yes.
Why do you want to jump into this pool?
Well, we are quite excited about audio, and we're excited about, I should mention my co-founder, Jonathan Coates, formerly at the BBC, worked on great shows like The Travel Show and Click, Newsnight, and the two of us just thought, look, this is a great opportunity. We've got loads of good ideas. We want to use our editorial experience to kind of chase the niche market when it comes to podcasts. So already we've got our first podcast. It's Independent Thinking, which is the Chatham House podcast, which we can talk about, despite the Chatham House rule. We can talk about it. And that's presented by Bronwyn Maddox, and we're really excited about that.
It's kind of part branded content, I guess, as well for them. What do they want to get out of the podcasting world?
Well, they have been running the podcast for themselves for a while, but they wanted someone to come in with the experience and expertise. And I guess for them, because they're one of the most foremost think tanks in the world, they've got more than 200 fellows, people with amazing experience when it comes to international affairs. And when it comes to, you see a news piece or and you want to have some expert analysis, then you go to Chatham House. And they want to use the podcast to kind of showcase, to the world who they are and what they do. So just by using us and our experience and expertise, we're hoping to really grow this podcast and even do more than just that.
Jake, it's interesting, isn't it? It's a busy market, and even people with brands maybe have had a go at doing podcasting. They probably realised they need a lot of expertise to do it well. It's a challenge to cut through.
Yes, it sure is.
I love your short answers. It's good.
No, it's a challenge. And again, it depends on the market. So I would say in the UK, there's so many great producers making so many great things.
Yeah, sure.
Your show sounds excellent. Don't think about any problem in breaking through. Whereas in some other markets, there is a clearer path towards the charts with some sharp investment into PR and things like that.
And when you think about kind of content that you're commissioning or acquiring, obviously you've got sort of creators who sort of exist already fully formed, and are there then ideas that people are pitching that are new to the platform? What's the content strategy? What are you trying to make that app?
Yeah, it's intentional. The content strategy is intentionally varied. So we have a lot of shows that we make ourselves. We have development and production teams and beautiful studios across Europe and Mexico. We also acquire existing shows for housing on Podimo and engaging their audience on Podimo, as well as a whole lot of shows that are not exclusively on Podimo, but that are on the RSS. The RSS is on Podimo. And our listeners are listening to those shows, and we actually share a portion of the subscription revenue that they generate with them every month as well.
I suppose that's a sales pipeline as well, because you can obviously see shows that are doing well on Open RSS in the app and think, well, maybe they should join the party, I suppose.
Yeah. We do have a great amount of data. I'd love to have more data. I was at YouTube before joining Podimo, and I crave that level of Google data. But yeah, we leverage it where we can. Well,
YouTube announced this week that they have a billion consumers a month are consuming podcast content on their platform. Yeah. It's a phenomenal success for them. that maybe a lot of people don't think about them as a podcast platform.
Yeah, I saw something else. I think it's in the United States, 30% of podcasts are consumed via YouTube. So even the idea of a podcast being just an audio proposition anymore, that's out the window, right? Because look, we're filming this podcast today. So I think that fact, and there are so many people now choosing to engage in podcasts using YouTube and other platforms, by the way, I think it's a real growth opportunity there.
Video on the agenda for Podimo and the app?
Video has been on the agenda. Almost all of our exclusives have video. This is pre-video buzz. But yeah, more and more so, and especially as Podimo expands into a well-rounded media company beyond its initial core as a subscription service, video is going to be an important way that we engage with listeners.
Maybe we should have a name. I think we should, like, the three of us, come up with a name for like video podcast. What should we call it?
While we think about that, we'll go to a break and we'll see you back for the quiz in a sec. Welcome back. Just enough time for the media quiz, guys. You don't get away from it this week. And this week's quiz is entitled Name That Global Everything Company. Plenty of stories swirling around about some of the big global corporations that run our media. But can you guess which mega global corporation is at the center of these stories? It's a best of three. So buzz in with your name if you know the answer. So Warren, you will say...
Warren.
And Jake, you will say...
Jake.
Let's play Name That Global Everything Company. Right. Question number one. Which company has taken full creative control?
Warren.
Oh, yes. Good. Go for it.
Amazon.
Yeah, so this is full creative control of the James Bond franchise. Timothy Dalton, not one of the greatest James Bonds.
Well, hang on a minute.
He said it was kind of sad. Is it kind of sad that Amazon are now fully in charge?
Yeah, I should, full disclosure, I'm a huge Bond fan, a super fan. And I think talking to my Bond friends and even reading Bond Reddit this week, I did do that. There's this feeling that because Amazon are now going to have creative control, although not total creative control, by the way, they will potentially have spin-offs. They'll do maybe a Moneypenny franchise, a young James Bond, and try and expand, use all the IP in the same way they have done with Marvel and create all these Bond, TV shows and films. There was something special, I must say, about just having like one film every 3 or 4 years, and the idea that could be lost, there's a tinge of sadness for me.
You're not up for a Bond cinematic universe then?
I can't say I am, but there are bound to be younger Bond fans out there who'll have a different point of view to me.
Okay, right. Question number 2. Which company has axed Neighbours in its 40th anniversary year?
Jake. Are all the answers going to be Amazon?
Don't know. Have to wait and see.
Let's go with Amazon.
So poor Neighbours. It got axed before, bought back by Amazon, and now it's been axed again. I mean, if Amazon can't make it a success, it's probably done, isn't it?
I'm really interested as to why it wasn't seen as a success, or why they canceled it. I think if you imagine the commissioning strategy from a company like Amazon, a recurring series or soap like Neighbours could be really valuable in engaging an audience in between some of their bigger bets. And so I was really excited when they announced the reboot, not because I'm a personal Neighbours fan. I have an appreciation for the amount of years it was on air, but because it seemed like a really sharp strategy. So if I'm guessing, it would be that they potentially overpaid for the series. And even if it got really good engagement, it didn't meet that level that they needed it to meet at a cost they did. But that's just a guess.
Warren, Neighbours fan?
Can't say I am. My friend Julia is a, shout out to her by the way, is a huge super fan, but not me. I was more of a home and away guy.
Well, I think there's enough episodes to run for the rest of the year. So if you want to catch up, you've got like 30, 35 years of
great.
haven't you?
Perfect.
Okay, question number 3. Which company is eyeing co-production deals in the UK?
Jake.
Well done.
Let's go with... Amazon.
It is Amazon. Do you think this could unlock some of the shows that are stuck in kind of green light purgatory?
Yeah, I read that headline with a certain amount of personal relevance, having been having brought YouTube originals to Europe when I was at YouTube, and being a part of that FANG group that was a small number of players over-investing in a small number of shows. And for as exciting as that was at the time, I think what the industry's learned is that is not a sustainable way to grow an industry. Mm-hmm. And I'm really interested and excited by Amazon's willingness to challenge that way of commissioning. And I do think it has the potential to open up collaboration with a much larger and wider group of producers and to be distributing in really interesting ways. I think the darkest possible version of that is they spend less and continue to make the same amount of shows with the same producers. But let's see, hopefully it's a bit brighter.
Yeah, I guess as well, because there's been a bit of a blockage in the last year with Channel 4 being the home of independent commissioning in the UK, not really commissioning anything because of their freeze. This could be a really good moment for independent independent producers in the UK.
Well, congratulations, Jake. You win the quiz. You get to define what video podcasting is called for the next 10 years. So if you can come back next time and tell us what you came up with, that'd be great. My thanks to Jake, Warren and Chris Curtis earlier. Where can people keep up with your new business, Warren?
Oh, thank you very much. indiomedia.co.uk. Indio. So India, like the country, but with an O at the end.
Good. And Jake, how can people find out about Podimo?
Podimo.com, or give me a shout, jake@podimo.com. I love a good chat.
Excellent. Thank you both. And thank you to you for listening and watching as well. My name is Matt Deegan. The producer was Matt Hill. It was a Rethink audio production with video support from Podcast Discovery. Remember, you can sign up to our free newsletter at themediaclub.com. That's themediaclub.com. We'll remind you about the show. And it's also useful for us to find out who you are to. So go check that out. Meanwhile, I'll see you next week.